Adoption agencies can often come with the perception of a really hefty price tag, but that's not always the case. Some adoption agencies are nonprofit adoption agencies that specifically allow you to get the support you need, do pieces and parts of the adoption journey on your own, and then decide what opportunities you're interested in your profile being shown to. I recently came across a really unique adoption agency called Adoption Assistance, and they are licensed in Kentucky, Indiana, and Tennessee, and their approach is really different than any other adoption agencies that I've met with. Now, if you are not in one of those states, I still want you to pay close attention to the lessons that Julie from Adoption Assistance shares in today's conversation, because I know it will be invaluable information to help guide you along the process. Please join me in welcoming Julie to the show. Julie, thank you so much for being willing to join us today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I would love if you would start just right off the top here with sharing a little bit more about yourself and kind of your work in the adoption world with our audience so they can get to know you just a little bit better.
Sure. My journey goes way back. I started Adoption Assistance, which is the name of my agency, 25 years ago. I was actually working in the education field, and I was a guidance counselor and an elementary school principal when we adopted our first child. And I really had a passion for adoption, and I loved kids and loved my work. But at the time, I wanted to be able to spend more time with my children at home. And so I resigned from that job, and I started my agency, Adoption Assistance, to help other families adopt. Over the years, we've adopted 5 children. I adopted ours internationally at the time. International adoptions were running so quickly and they were pretty dependable. And so we went that route. Now, of course, the whole landscape has pretty much changed. But when I started adoptions and we started helping other people adopt, it was mainly, I would say, 90% international. And over the years, 25 years later, here we are, and we do probably 90% domestic adoptions. So my journey is all because of my passion for adoption, and we've learned so much, and we love just building families.
That is awesome. And I'm super excited to have you on the show today. Amanda on my team had found your agency and really brought it forward to me because we were looking for nonprofit adoption agencies that really have a focus on keeping costs as much as we can in check in the adoption process. What we thought was really unique about your agency was the fact that you work across multiple states. So would you mind to share a little bit more about your agency and also the states that you all work within?
Yes, and that has been a huge passion for us, is to keep our adoption fees as low as possible. I mean, believe it or not, we have not raised our home study fee in 25 years because if we're able to do it, and we want to keep it as low as we can for families. And so a lot of people will come to us like, why are your fees so much lower than everyone else? And that's just because we literally are trying to do it as a mission to help other families be able to adopt. We are licensed in Kentucky and Tennessee and Indiana, which are all states that are right here, right next to us. Of course, I started our agency in Kentucky, and one of my women who's been with me now for 23 years got transferred to Tennessee, probably about 15 years ago. And so we worked together to get licensed there. And then we opened up in Indiana because we had so many people calling us saying, we're right across the bridge. Can't you help us? And so we have really loved being able to work and service all the families kind of in our little region here and successfully help them navigate the journey. Most people awesome. Come to us saying, we want to adopt and have no idea how to start. So we just really take them through that whole process.
Yeah. And I'd love to learn more about the process, because if there is one kind of question that shows up in my DMs on a regular basis, which is where to start, what do I do? So I'd love your perspective on how you start to walk your clients through that journey.
Most people come to us having been on some type of journey. I mean, we definitely have some that just say, I've always known in my heart I want to adopt, and we're starting right off from square one. But most people say, we've been thinking about this a long time. We've been on this infertility route, or we've always wanted to have, a child that we adopted, and we already have biological children or something like that. So I always say the biggest decision of all is making sure this is the right thing for our family at this time. And sometimes I'll talk to a couple where maybe one person's on board and the other one's not yet. And 2 years later, they'll call me back. We're both ready to go now. So the biggest decision of all is this the right thing for us? If it is, I say that you have to jump in with a leap of faith. When I first started, of course, there was no internet out there to do all this kind of research. Now it is, and it's amazing. But a lot of it is either not updated, maybe not factual. And so I say, do the best you can and then go trust somebody that's a professional in the field to kind of give you the current information. So my first thing is to say, to jump in with that leap of faith that, yes, we're going to do it, and find people that to work with you and help you that you trust and that you feel like can take you on this journey, in a very positive way. So I always say the very first thing is to decide you want to do it, and then kind of look out and find a licensed agency in your state. The law is everybody that adopts has to work with a licensed agency in their state to do their home study and help them with that process. And so most people that come to us they have to reside in our 3 states, but then we take them and we give them the basic information about adoption and kind of what they're looking for and kind of getting to know them, and then can kind of lead them down that next path.
That is super great information. I agree. I tell people all the time, because they'll show up and they'll say, I've Googled this and I found like 7 different results. And I'm like, yeah, that it's unfortunate because there's different language and there's just different perspectives out there on everything. And to your point, every state is different. Some states require you to use an agency. Some states don't require you to use an agency, or they require you to use them for a home study and for finalization. And like every state is so unique that is what honestly makes the adoption, aside from emotional and financial investments, all of that. But that is what makes the adoption process so difficult and just so confusing, because every state is so nuanced. So I'd love if you would share just a little bit about how your process works overall, which, after someone comes and says, okay, we're ready to adopt, we know we want to go the agency route, and we think that you guys are great partners for us because you've spent the time interviewing each other and really making sure that you're that right fit. What happens from there? And is it different based upon what state that they reside in within your 3 states that you work with it?
Within our 3 states, every single person that adopts, even if you're doing an independent adoption, not even technically through an agency, you still have to have that home study done. So what we do is we tell families, if you want to adopt, that's on your heart, you want to adopt a child, then we can help you with whichever path you choose. Because a lot of our families do adopt out of state. That means we'll do their home study and they may adopt from Florida or California, Ohio, some different state, but we are still kind of their leading tool here to do their home study and kind of help them with those next steps. So the first thing families always do when they say we want to move forward is start that home study. The home study is really a gate to bring a child into their home. And then we always tell families that home studies are 2 parts. It's not only getting information from them, but us providing a lot of basic training about attachment, grief, bonding, because it's so important that families are well prepared. I always say you can never have too many tools in your toolbox, or well prepared to parent that child that they're bringing into the home. No matter if it's a newborn, a 5-year-old, or a 15-year-old, you need to be prepared for that child. And so our home study process, or all home study processes, should be that 2 parts of one, you're gathering basic information, birth certificates and taxes and references and medical forms and background checks. And all of those are the documents that help support your actual report. And the actual home study report is kind of, like I said, your gate, because at the end of all home studies, it will be a recommendation for you to bring a child into your home of a certain gender and age and sex and race. And all of that's into that final recommendation. So that home study is really the initial part to get the whole process started. Once you have a home study and you're approved, you're kind of good to go. We always say you're active at that point. You're good to go. And that way you can then adopt a child, whether it be in one of your own home states or whether it is anywhere in the United States. Of course, international home studies are written specific for an international country. So a home study for China is going to look very different than a home study for Bulgaria. However, a home study process is going to be very, very similar, no matter how you do it. Even if you're adopting a friend of a friend's child, which we consider here an independent adoption, because those can be really beneficial and a great way to adopt. But you still have to have that home study to make sure, again, that that child's coming into a safe environment. So the very first part of that is the home study process. And then once you have that home study done, we have families put together their profile books. And a lot of times we will have families start working on that profile book during the home study process, because there is an amount of time of gathering your pictures and your text and everything that you want to put into your profile to actually market yourself. And I don't know if you want me to get into profile books, but basically, a profile book is a book that the birth mothers, expectant parents, look at to choose a family. I would say in our case, probably about 95% of our expectant parents are choosing that family and using that profile book. They never read the home study that has confidential information. The profile book shows who you are. And it's really important when you're putting this together that it accurately reflects your family.
Yeah. So you said 95% of your expectant parents are looking at the profile books and picking someone from those profile books. Are the other 5% leaving it up to your agency to pick?
A lot of them will have a little bit of criteria. Maybe I want the longest waiting family. We'll hear that, quite often just because they have a heart for it and it doesn't matter the specifics. I say most of our birth expectant parents do have criteria. Maybe they want a family with children in the home or no children or a pet, we have all kinds. I always tell families there's never a right or wrong way to make a profile book in the sense of what's going to make that family pick you. Because sometimes we have had one, where they put a Halloween picture in there and they were like, I love Halloween. I love when people dress up, and this family did that, so I'm going to pick them. And we've had other ones. I've always wanted a dog that looks just like this, and they have that kind of dog. That's why I want. So you never know what's going to touch that birth parent's heart. And it could be something that's so minor that you don't even think about. So it's really important that you share who you are as people and know that that right child and that right expectant parent is going to, select you to be the parent of their child.
Yeah, I know my audience oftentimes tell me that they get so panicked at the time of creating the profile book because they're like, what if there's one thing about me that I didn't say that would have made them pick me? And what I try to help them really get to the heart of is, who are you as a family? What is the essence of your story? And then we've got to tell that in a clear way that then makes an emotional connection, that makes a lasting impression on them in order for you to really stand out from the others in the stack that are kind of pushed across the table at them.
That's exactly right. And that's what we tell families too. And it's really important that you really spend time working on this profile book, because that cover picture, a lot of times is going to make it whether they're going to open the book and really read through it or not. And so you really want to do everything you can to connect, like you said, emotionally with that birth parent for whatever reason.
Yeah. So once someone has worked on their profile book and they've turned it over to you all, you have then shared the profiles with expectant parents. What happens at the point where they're picking a parent kind of from there forward in your process?
Yeah, so our agency is a little bit different than other ones that I have seen out there. And it's only because, like I said, we've been doing this for 25 years now, which is quite a long time. And so what we tend to do with our agency is that we are really networked in, and we work with a lot of expectant parents in our states. And then we've also networked with the agencies and attorneys across the United States that would contact us saying, do you have any families for this situation? So we do, in our situation, we have a private listserv group where we post all available situations for our families. And our families can look at all the situations and decide whether they meet that criteria and they want to be considered. And so our families have really liked that. Instead of just doing their home study and waiting to say, am I going to be, selected, they can have some input and say, this one looks like a great one for us. We want to be considered, or no, that doesn't really look like what we're looking for. And so for us, our families then get to decide when they want to have their profile shown, and they just have to keep showing it until they get selected. And I tell families, sometimes you get lucky, and second time you've shown you're selected, sometimes you may have to show your profile 40, 50 times before you get selected. But we've never had in 25 years anyone start that didn't get selected along the way. Now, certainly, there are going to be instances where there are failed adoptions and just some heartbreaking things that happen along the way. But if you take time and you grieve and you say, okay, I'm going to reboot and try this again, our families have, stuck with it, have all been able to, get matched eventually. And then it all makes sense.
Yeah, that is great. And I didn't know the listserv aspect of your agency. I'd love to ask a few questions about that.
Sure.
So from a listserv perspective, what type of information are they learning about the opportunity? And then on the flip side, how are they then sharing back their profile? Are they saying, please send my profile book to this person? So if you could walk us a little bit more through that, I think that's a really unique approach.
So when we always list everything we know about the situation, and we tend to work with a lot of birth parents ourselves. And so expectant parents, we will write down, everything we know about the situation. Why are they placing? What kind of criteria do they want? What fees are involved? And we tell everything we know. Sometimes we know quite a bit. Sometimes we just know a little bit, depending, especially sometimes attorneys don't have as much of the heartfelt detail that we like. They just kind of have the facts about the case, which is, fine too. So, and some of our prospective adoptive parents can jump in not knowing much, and other ones want to know lots of details before they feel comfortable putting in. Again, there's no right or wrong. You have to go with your own comfort level. But what we do is we put out there everything we know, and then our families then can tell us whether they want to be considered. If they do, we will pull their profile books and we will meet with the birth mother and say, here are the families, that are interested in your situation. Sometimes we will also send PDF versions of profile books, depending on where they are. So we have all of our families give us 2 to 3 actual books, and then we'll take a PDF version. So we're constantly using both of them, just depending on the situation that's out there.
That totally makes sense. And I think, again, it's really unique that you all have some birth parents that you're working with directly. Then you also kind of have this extended network. When you talked about the extended network, it did raise a question for me that since you are licensed in, the 3 states of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Indiana, that are you able to also accept families outside of that zone as well, if they maybe have a home study from someone who's licensed in that state to provide that home study?
That's a really great question. And no, we do not. We only accept home studies and work with families in our states where we're licensed in. And that's really important because we want to be able to be there and give the best support to our families. And it's very important too, because when we go to visit a family's home and we do the home study ourselves, we really advocate for our families when we're talking with birth expectant parents. And we don't feel like taking someone else's home study. We can really know that family as well as we do. When we've said, yes, we've been here and here they are, and let's call them right now. And we really feel like we have a strong connection, which again turns and gives that birth parent trust in us. So that's important to us to be able to work with our own families.
Yeah, that's a really great clarification. And that trust, honestly, is what makes a really big difference in the overall process. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, listen, they are making the biggest life-changing decision for them and for their child. Like, this will impact the trajectory of their entire life, and doing everything you can to be honest and to build trust. And even if it's difficult, to communicate the difficult things early on, to say like, gosh, I know you really want to have this level of communication, but I'm really not comfortable with that. Like, those things are what we owe our birth parents as we go through the process, because this is, one of those moments that trust is paramount. It's really important.
Exactly. And it's so important in building that with that expectant parent, because we always tell our adoptive families, they are giving you their child. There's nothing else anyone can ever give anyone as valuable as their child. Mm-hmm. And so it is very important that they feel like they can trust the family that they're selecting, and the people that are working with them. Our birth mother counselors are so important because that they're building that relationship, and a lot of times changing these women's and men's lives, not just on the placing the child, but them of just having someone believe in them and helping them and advocating and wanting them to get on their feet and do better.
Exactly. Having someone in their corner for, forever is really important, because that lack of support system sometimes is what has brought them, to this moment of their life, for sure. Okay. So someone submitted their profile to you. Mm-hmm. You have opportunities that are available for families to submit to. And so once a family has submitted to it and say they've been picked, what happens next in the process?
Yes, that's the exciting thing. So once they've actually been matched, and we always have, no matter how somebody gets matched, there's always a match call, between either we try to meet in person, or there's a video call now, which has been so great, so that they can talk to each other, because it's really important that it's two-sided. Both sides feel good in their heart that we're ready to move forward, because it's important for that expectant parent to like, yes, I looked at their book, but now I've gotten to talk to them and I've met them. Now, of course, some expectant parents don't want to meet, and that's okay. And we always honor that. But most of them do, especially now where it's evolved so much and people understand open adoption much more than they used to, that it's really good for them both sides to connect. And after that, it's all about building that relationship, especially if it's going to be more of an open or semi-open adoption. A lot of times they want to build that relationship during that pregnancy. Sometimes our expectant parents and birth parents talk and text back and forth every day. Sometimes it's 4 times during the pregnancy. You just never, each case is kind of different, but it's that building that relationship during the waiting time. I mean, then of course, once the time has come, if it's a situation where they're pregnant and going to, deliver the child, of course, families will typically always go to the hospital and then take that child home. And of course, if you're adopting out of state, all cases do go through, it's called the Interstate Compact for the Placement of Children, where the laws of both states need to be met. And so if one of our families is maybe adopting from Florida, they will go to Florida. When the child's born, they will stay there for a few days until it's cleared and they can come back home to Kentucky or Tennessee or Indiana. And I will say too, over the years, it used to be we mail FedEx the package and they'd get it and go to the next. And it took a while. Now everything, of course, is electronic. And most of our families are home in 3 or 4 days. It's pretty fast now.
Yeah,
much better than it used to be.
Yeah, exactly. Honestly, it's even much better than it was 8 years ago. We were in Florida for 3 weeks, a little over 3 weeks, actually, waiting to clear ICPC to come home because we just had like the horrible misfortune of the single person in the state of Florida that was responsible for ICPC documentation being on vacation the first week, then came back, and the person in Arkansas was on vacation the next week. And so it was a an early September timeframe. And I was like, everybody's just out finishing up their vacations before, everybody goes back to school. And so we were there for a while, but now, since COVID, you're right, everything has gone electronic and makes that much, much simpler. And honestly helps you save a lot of money because it
really does.
Okay. So I know we've talked a lot about, the birth mom or the expectant parents picking. Can you talk a little bit about what you have seen from your experience of birth fathers being involved? Mm-hmm. I get a lot of questions around the legal side of things, which we won't necessarily dive into because I recognize you're not an adoption attorney, but from your perspective and working in an agency, how do you typically see birth fathers involved in the process?
And I will say too, laws surrounding birth fathers vary, and timeframes for expectant parents and everyone else vary from state to state to state. But we, when a birth father is involved in the process, we love that because the more support that so they can support each other in this. And also if they're making that plan together, we always know that's the healthiest for us, very smooth adoption plan. And we actually have had several even married couples over the years make an adoption plan for their child. I mean, there's been several times when they may have 3 or 4 children and say, we're going to do everything we can for this child. And this, yes, we are pregnant again, but we're not in a position to parent another child. And so in those cases, a lot of times the husbands are also involved during that process of actually picking a family and signing the documents and all of that. Now, there are going to be some situations where a birth father is not known. In Kentucky, it's legal to have an unnamed birth father. And so they have a right not to name the birth father. But I know that, that varies again from state to state about how that's handled. But we do always like it when a birth father can be involved. And it was really interesting. I was talking to a man the other day, and he was the father of the child and regularly admitted that and was looking into the adoption option. I mean, a lot of times we don't have the option to kind of talk to the men as much about just overall the adoption. And he was like, well, I want to be a good father. And he was like, this is what a good father does. You love your child and you want to give them the best you can. And so I'm all for this. Where we went into it not knowing what his thoughts were going to be as much, but to hear him say, that's what a good father does, really shows that, yes, they have, just like the mother who wants to make that best choice for her child, many of the dads do too. But sometimes they feel left out or feel like that they're not as serious as the mother, and they certainly could be.
Yeah, you hit on something that I'll try not to pull my soapbox out on, but as being an adoptive mom, I will hear from time to time, oh, the poor baby, right? They were given up. Like that language just goes all over me. I'm like, no, actually, this means that their first parents loved them so much that they recognized that they couldn't give them what they wanted to give them in life from opportunities perspective or support or time or whatever it was the factor for them. And so I love that example from that birth father that said, that's what a good father does, because I 100% agree. It's not, to me, it's not a woe is the situation. Is there trauma, and is there trauma that really surrounds the entire adoption process? Absolutely. But we can choose to see it such that it is a blessing from an adoptive parent's perspective, and something that was an intentional decision on the first parent's decision in part.
Exactly. And we're constantly educating about that, with how private adoption is different than foster care, because there are situations in foster care where they're involuntarily being removed. But in all of our cases, and that's what I said, in 25 years, we have never worked with a woman who didn't love that child. And that's why she was making an adoption plan, because they're intentionally going through all of this, which is much harder than some other options, to intentionally find the best family they can for their child, and to, go through the process of meeting them and going through the birth and having the adoptive parents there. And all of that is very hard emotionally, even though it's the right thing to do. And in your head, it's the right thing, but your heart sometimes, feels like it's not. And so it's finding that balance.
Yeah. I had a birth parent once tell me that she knew it was absolutely the right decision, but that it didn't mean that her heart wasn't going through a meat grinder. And I was like, wow. I was like, what a description to really analogy. Let you know the depths of the pain and the trauma that she's also experiencing in that moment as well. So it is definitely okay. So sorry to take us to that turn, but I do think it's important for the audience to hear the real parts of the adoption journey, because adoption is not always roses and sunshine, right? We've got to be willing to have those difficult conversations. But say that we have been picked, we've gone through the process, we've matched, baby has now come home. And what does the post-placement period look like before ultimate, kind of finalization? And what does post-placement contact look like as well in your states?
Sure. So as far as just the post-placement report for the adoptive family, and in all cases, we always go back into the home and just touch base with the family. How's the child eating, sleeping? How are you bonding? Do you feel like you're babysitting, or is this really your child now? And because all of that's important, and it's a process. And so we just kind of document and want to make sure, and really are there to provide support and resources to make sure that this placement is healthy and that it's moving forward in the right way. And at the end of all of post-placement periods, which can vary from anywhere from a month to 6 months, even longer sometimes, we write a court report for the judge so that they can finalize that adoption. And that adoption will tend to get finalized. I mean, there are some states and some exceptions, but most states are you do the post-placement and then you finalize, a couple of months later. And so that is the formal post-adoption part. But there's also, like you said, the post-adoption part with that expectant parent, which is now the birth parent. And that birth parent, we always tell families, never promise anything you cannot keep. And so there are going to be times when you've promised that birth mother, I'm going to send pictures every month for the first year. And, we're going to talk 5 times over FaceTime, whatever that is. It's so important that you honor that. Of course, there are some states that have legally binding open adoption contracts. Our states, actually Tennessee's is, but Kentucky and Indiana, it's just an ethical agreement between the two parties. And we do write them up a lot, but again, it's an ethical agreement. And it's really important. It's one thing if the birth parent moves and doesn't take the pictures and we're getting them returned and put them in their file. But it's a different thing if the adoptive parents say, we're not doing that anymore. And that is very upsetting to us as the adoption professionals, because one, we've promised these birth parents that this is what's going to happen and they've trusted us, but also just for your child. It's going to be important. The world is so small now. Someday they will reconnect, and you never want your child saying, or your mother, the birth mother saying, I tried and your parents didn't do what they told me they were going to do, because it's important that those parents are held accountable and do it for their child.
Yeah, I completely agree. In our personal situation, we have one birth mother who wants contact and one birth mother who doesn't. But for me, I send in the same information each time, for both kids on their corresponding schedules. And we have a contact with one birth mother and we don't with the other. But for me, I hope one day that changes. I hope that they do have the opportunity to meet. And I hope that birth mother, I don't talk about in public which one does and doesn't, but I hope that birth mother does pick up, however many years worth of pictures and letters from me talking about how that child has grown. Because I do think that's a really important, should they choose, really important opportunity for them to stay connected or to heal in a different way.
Absolutely. And it is interesting too. And I think you'll find, as children grow, and I've got 5 children now that, we adopted, and the oldest is 27 and the youngest is 20. And so there's a range there, but there are different approaches to their birth parents. Some, are very interested, and some are like, I'm happy with the way things are. And there's, again, no right or wrong, and that'll probably change throughout their life. But just to see everybody has an individual path, and it's hard to predict, how they're going to, what kind of contact that they want or don't want.
Yeah, I think that is so interesting. My two children have very different perspectives on that as well. But they've got a long time to grow. They're only 8 and 5, so we'll see where
Sure.
life takes us. I'm definitely very curious about what the future holds there. But we'll take it one day at a time and see how things evolve. But beyond that, I am so excited. This has been a really, really great conversation. You've walked us through the entire process. You've talked to us about how the different states really kind of differ from a process perspective, which is really interesting to know. And I also think you've shared some key lessons that even if people are outside of your state, that they can really apply in the adoption process, and really being informed along the way and finding the right professional to have those conversations with, and that you feel comfortable having those conversations with. I do think it's really important. So before we go, I'd love to give you the opportunity for any words of wisdom or any other things about the process that you'd like to share with the audience.
What I always tell families, like if I'm doing an information session or something at the very end, is that we have never had anyone that didn't think that it was the best thing that they did. Now, of course, there's going to be ups and downs, and there's heartache along the journey. It's not just a smooth path of like roses, like you said. There is going to be that, but that's all part of that kind of journey and story. But once you have that child in your family, things tend to make sense. And I don't know why, but I always say for whatever reason, that right child gets in that right family. And as long as the families are going into it for the right reasons and are dedicated to do whatever they can to help that child, because a lot of it's expectations. And when you do whatever you can to help that child where they are at that time, it's going to work out. So I just, anybody that opens their heart to adoption, I think that they're saying that there's certain kind of people, just like the birth parents, when they can open their heart to adoption, it shows what a brave, loving person there are. So adoption can be a beautiful thing. It doesn't mean it's always perfect, and there's, aren't going to be hard parts about it, but it can be such a positive.
That is phenomenal. Well, thank you, Julie, for your time. And I'd love for you to tell the audience how to get in touch with you. I know we will include the link to your website in the show notes where you're watching or listening to this, but I'd love for you to be able to tell them where to go.
Sure. Well, I think the easiest is our website. It's adoptionassistance.com. And you can always call us. We work all the time. And so we would love to talk to, and even if you live in another state and have questions, like I said, we've been doing this a long time, and I'd be happy to answer anything, because our goal is just to help families navigate that process.
That's awesome, Julie. Well, we really appreciate you coming on, and we appreciate everything you do for our adoption community. Again, when Amanda brought forth your, website and kind of your approach that she could see from there, I was really blown away by just how open you are to doing everything you can to make adoption approachable and affordable. And that is definitely our mission here from a My Adoption Coach perspective. So I'm super thankful for you and all the work that you do for our community.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Wasn't that conversation with Julie just amazing? I am so thankful for her time today, but I want to leave you with one really big parting tip when you're working with an agency like Julie's. I highly recommend that you create your profile book with a QR code on the inside that links out for someone to watch a video. That allows you to be more memorable. And I can tell you that when my clients use a video in their profile book, when they're working with an agency like Julie's, they match much faster than my clients who don't use a video. If you want to learn how to create the video to use inside your profile book, or how to create your profile book in general, head on over to myadoptioncoach.com/profile, or check out this next video.